recommend that we close the meeting, so it's all yours, Bruce.
Well, first of all, I was driving at work one day along through a field, and I ran into a bunch of guys walking through the field and asked them if they found anything. And Dave was good enough to come over and talk to me a little bit and told me about his collection and said he had quite an extensive collection. And he's been doing it for a long time, and him and his friend, well, his friend is Tom, and Tom's been doing it for 27 years, going around collecting Indian artifacts. I do want to say one thing. I received a phone call this morning before I got here, and a gentleman called and asked me where the collection came from, and asked me if I could tell him exactly where it came from, and I told him I couldn't. And he wanted to know who the person was and everything else, and then he said to me, he says, I represent the Seneca Nation.
Who?
He says his name was Dr. Latimer. And I told him, I said, well, I says, you know, we'll get back to you and let you. I said, I can't give you any information because I don't know where he found anything. But I want to give you the legal jargon on Indian artifacts and what you can do with them and what you can't do with them. First of all, you can't transport them across state lines.
Oh my God.
Okay, if you find them in Pennsylvania, they have to stay in Pennsylvania. You cannot take anything from a burial ground. If you have an artifact that you found where there was a burial ground, it is illegal to take it. Even if you're the landowner, you were supposed to notify the federal government and the state government. There are two acts. There's the Archaeological Resources Protection Act of 1979, and there's the what's called NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Reparation Act, 1990. And you can own any artifacts if you get permission to take them from a field. If the owner of the field says go and dig them, go and pick them up, you can take them, and you can own them. You can resell them. But if it came from a burial ground, you can't take them. That's the only thing you you might be able to take the artifacts from the burial ground, but you can't touch any bones. You can't take any bones. If you find any bones at all, you have to notify the federal government. Down in Virginia and North Carolina, when you find a grave of a chief, it will be covered completely with arrowheads. That's what they did down there. When they buried a chief, they covered it with the best brightly colored arrowheads that they could find. And they would be like a 12 by 12 area completely laid out with arrowheads all over it, wherever they could put them. So that's just a little bit of a background, just in case you like. I know, like a lot of people like to go out and hunt arrowheads and look for artifacts. There is nothing stopping you from picking them up and taking them as long as you have permission from the landowner. You cannot take them from a federal park or a state park. You can't dig. You can't use a metal detector there. You can't dig there. You can't remove anything from there. You can if you don't get caught, but you're not supposed to. It's illegal to take it from a state or federal park. Every state has different rules. Georgia has rules, Alabama has rules, Mississippi has rules, Pennsylvania has very little rules as far as state. But just to give you a little bit of background, because I know a lot of people are going to say after seeing this, I'm going out digging arrowheads, I'm going looking for arrowheads. So just to give you a little bit of a background so you know a little bit about it so you don't get yourself in trouble. Okay? With that being said, we know there were Indians here. We know they were here a long time before us. We have artifacts here from this local area. We have some that came from Chapman Lake. We have some that came from the Black Ledges up here. And we do know that they were here. And how I know that more than anything was yesterday I was out for a walk and I found this. And this was locally, not too far from here, in a stream. And it's it's something you would either eat out of or like a mortar and pestle for crushing their corn, crushing their maize. And it's charred a little bit, like where it was by a fire. There was a fire pit right there by it that was all covered in from water coming down the stream. Some of the best places to find this stuff is at the headwaters of a stream. You will find some washing down. You can take them in a gravel bar. You can take them out of streams and rivers. You can collect and pick from there. They don't like you to go digging in the banks of streams because then you need a DEP permit because you're doing something with the stream. So if you're looking and digging into the bank of a stream, if you get caught, you could get yelled at for it. I'm sure they wouldn't arrest you or anything, but you're disturbing the bank of a stream, which you're not supposed to do without a DEP permit. Everything on this side here are things of mine that I've either purchased or found. There's some fossils. There's a couple of rubbing stones here, and you'll be able to look at these a little bit later. And these books are all on Indians, and this is a little bit from the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts took everything from the Indians. Everything they teach is based on the Indian heritage, Indian culture. And this is an Indian mission book. This goes back, I think, to 1900. A little bit about the different points. I have books that tell you what they are, the different periods they came from. And there's a lot of really nice pictures in here. You're welcome to look at these. This is an Indian blanket that was owned by Tom in the back. And if you notice, we talked a little bit about symbols, of Indian symbols. And if you remember, well, I have a book by Rudyard Kipling, and it has a great big design on the front, and it's a swastika. Rudyard Kipling, he was a Mason, wrote about masonry, but the book had a swastika on the front. And if you notice in the symbol on the Indian blankets, and you'll see it on a lot of Indian, it's basically the same thing.
Yeah. Date. What date?
The date of the blanket, I don't know, Tom.
About 1900, I believe.
Around 1900. And I pieced this back together as good as I could, but it's a beautiful blanket, and it's not in perfect condition, but it's something that's definitely going to stay with me and stay with the Historical Society as long as I'm around. So I have a few other items here that you're glad to look at, and I'm going to turn the program over to Tom and Dave and let them explain to you where they found some of this stuff, but they're not going to tell you where they found it. They're going to tell you in the general vicinity.
Wyoming gravel.
So you'll have an idea that it was in Pennsylvania. But most collectors will not tell you where they collect things, because then somebody else gets all the good stuff while they're gone. They're not there. I know it from digging bottles and digging and going out with different people. They'll always call me and say, "Where'd you find that bottle?" And I'll say, "I found it somewhere in Pennsylvania." And that's about all I'll tell them. So it's the same thing with this stuff. I mean, it's hard to find. You could walk for hours and hours and hours and not find anything. You could walk for 10 minutes and find 5 pieces. It depends on the weather, depends on how much the rain brought stuff up out of the ground, and it depends on just whether or not it got plowed the right way and brings the right stuff up. It just, you never know.
But they're usually always within the foot.
Yeah, they're not far. All right, so Tom and Dave, if you guys want to jump up here.
Well, I've been picking like 5 years. I met him, well, actually it's about 7 years. I met him, same place I met Bruce in the field, so I became real good friends with him, and we started going all over the place. My collection just started growing. And I like the picking part of it, but I'd rather other people see it, you know. It's not doing me no good. All my friends already looked through it and held it, and rather pass some of that on. I never done a presentation before.
Well, you just want to explain to them what
what
each one of these are. And you're going to start with the bigger ones. It'll be a little bit easier, and explain to them, and then take some of the small pieces and then go into the points.
Books. I got a Flint saw here. And this book is an identification book. It's the same picture here as the piece.
It's the same exact piece that's in the book.
Oh. I'll pass it around. Just look at it. Got some fire starters here. I found one near my house. I actually had a boat launch. Me and my girlfriend were taking the dogs down to the riverbank to take them swimming. And I opened the door to let the dogs out, and this was staring me in the face. So that was a nice find on the riverbank. I got this other one. This came out of a field that we pick all the time. Same thing, fire starter, probably for a left-handed bow drill. Fit your hand, perfect. Got a bead. Don't exactly know what it is. Maybe some kind of marble game, or
Or it could be part of it. Oh, that one? Oh, okay. Yeah, that one.
got a couple different sized petals. One was found in Falls, the other one was found upriver, up past Tunkhannock. But that goes with something like Tom's ball, you know, so they can grind in it.
Yeah.
Or like bread rollers, doll rollers.
Yeah, you can roll.
You can kind of see where
Antique
they
rolling
were
pin.
used.
Yeah, that's the early rolling pins. I remember. You remember me talking about it at the last meeting. That's what they would use to roll their maize, and they could use it to pound it in pestle.
Usually there's a big rock somewhere nearby, and it'd be like this,
Rolled out.
but it'd be almost the size of this table. It would have the markings like this somewhere in the rock, but
Oh.
most of the rocks are gone, or maybe they're down by the river, you know, but underwater, or just covered in mud.
Got a couple grinding stones, hammer stones, various sizes, small one, medium, and then a large, and they're all worn on the side of it.
Some of those rounder ones there could be earlier discodials they have, similar to that one that he has in his hand right there. And that was a game that they played with like arrows and spears. They'd throw it at the rock as they rolled it.
No.
They'd call it chunky.
Yeah.
But yeah, some of
I
those
think
might
this
be
is-
something like that.
This
you know?
is a big
It's hard to
brain
say.
basher. It's got a groove all the way around it. It's probably tied on a stick. Yeah, well, maybe Queen Esther's. Got some jewelry, got a little piece of jewelry here.
With the holes in it, they would tie it
Or
in.
it could have been used for a pump drill, as a counterweight for the pump drill.
No.
Various arrowheads, some broken, some whole pieces. So, this is probably used for digging out their dugouts and stuff.
There's another one.
So, yeah, here's another one. Tied to a stick.
No,
They're pretty nice and smooth, you know.
y'all can come up and look at him when he gets done or whatnot, you know?
I don't know, they all came from the Williams Valley.
Well, you were showing the difference between the size of these and the size of the really tiny piece here.
Yeah, bird pumps.
Explain to them like what they would use them for.
They use them for anything, actually.
Yeah.
Those were actually spear points,
Yeah.
but these were used for hunting, like
Yeah,
killing
one of the
deer.
things I mentioned at the last meeting, last time I brought these in, is that, you know, everybody sees these and they say they're arrowheads. That's the first thing everybody says. Well, these are actually spear points. These are bigger. They're, a spear would have been a bigger, longer piece of stick, you know, to throw something, to spear fish. And these are actual arrows. You can see the difference.
No.
You know, this would be on a thin shaft arrow, you know, for hunting small game and stuff like that. Squirrels, birds, you know, little things. These would be used more for like when they were going after a bigger animal,
Woolly mammoths,
you know,
to
yeah.
bear,
Bear,
the
deer.
big cats that were around back then.
Back then there was panthers and, you know, black panthers and lions, mountain lions and all kinds of stuff. And, you know, I don't know the date of these. I don't know how to date this stuff yet. But you know, there are archaeologists out there that can tell you the dates on everything. When I was working with them up in Tunkhannock, when they were putting that bypass in, they would pull out the piece and they would exactly say, this is at whatever period, this is whatever period, this is whatever period. And they were able to go down in layers as we were digging and tell you the different periods of time that those people lived in. And then we dug a great big pit in the ground, and we had a geologist come, and the geologist would sit there and go, these people lived here at this time, and these people lived here at this time, and these people lived here at this time. And then she went like this, and she said, nobody lived on Earth at this period. This was the period of the Great Flood.
Oh.
And nobody lived on Earth during that period of the Great Flood. And then, you know, I was amazed. I mean, she could actually look at the lines in the dirt. It was, because what I had to do is I had to shave the earth completely flat, and then they would trowel it and smooth it so that you could see every line in that earth. And she could see every line and tell you what period of time those lines were, what type of Indians lived there. And this was up by Tunkhannock. A lot of that stuff is in a museum in Tunkhannock, and what's not there is in the State Museum in Harrisburg. Might not be on display because every time I've gone down there it wasn't on display. Most of the time they have it in the basement and they have it in boxes, and then if people want to look at it they have to make an appointment and you go down and look at it.
I seen it.
You seen it?
I seen it.
Well, I was there.
But it wasn't on display. I had to go to a whole separate building away from the museum and walk like 4 football fields away to find it.
Yeah, they store it, they maintain it, they catalog every single piece that's there, where it came from, date it, document it, and then they put it away. And they'll have they change their exhibits in the museum so much, they'll have a period of time where they're going to do something on Indians and then they'll bring it out. A lot of times, like I was amazed that I went down there and couldn't find anything.
Question. These layers, were they formed from volcanoes or from flood sediments, or?
They were mostly flood sediments. They were all different periods along the river. It was along the Susquehanna River. It was up by Tunkhannock, and they put that new bypass in. And right where that bypass is, directly below that, you wouldn't believe the pottery that they were pulling out.
That was another question. You found pottery at all?
I find a lot of pottery myself. I collect pottery. He not so much a pottery guy. He gives me a lot of the pieces that he picks up.
But you don't have any pottery here?
I did not bring none with me. I wasn't prepared to show no my stuff today because he wanted to bring his stuff and I didn't want to take away from his stuff, you know. And I wasn't sure what I was coming to. He just asked me to come with him, so I just came for the ride, you know.
So you find whole pots or parts or shards?
I've never found a whole pot.
Shards.
Very hard to find a whole pot. Even the archaeological guys that were doing the digging there, they would find pieces because when they have to leave a settlement, they take everything with them to go up into the mountains for the winter. One thing about the Indians is they lived along the rivers because that was the best place to hunt and fish. And then when the weather get bad, they would start migrating up into the mountains. And they'd find a place where the wind wouldn't blow at them. It would be like on the backside of a mountain because the wind mostly blows from west to east. They would get on the east side of the mountain and they would build a lean-to so that the snow would go up over the top, the wind would blow over the top of them, and that's where they would stay. They'd find caves, they'd find overcropped rock overhangs, and they'd stay underneath it where they could stay out of the weather, build a fire. And they could still hunt from there down into a valley. They could still go down in the valley and come back up. So they would take most of their stuff with them when they went up in the woods, and then they'd come back down again. They'd bring it back. Some of it get broken, and when in transition, some of it would get broken if they got raided by another Indian tribe. They'd have to, rush. Some of it would get broken naturally, like we break dishes and everything else. So a lot of the times you'll find a fire pit. And what amazed me was when I was working with these guys, they would have an area, and I'd start digging, and I would have to take maybe this much at a time, scrape it, and I'd scrape it down across, and you'd see nothing but black earth in a circle, and that would be their fire pit. And then they'd stop me as soon as they seen that, and they would start cleaning it, and they'd go inside that fire pit, and they'd be pulling out little pieces of bone, little pieces of pottery. And then I'd dig another spot, and they'd find a spot about this big that was black. And then they'd dig around it, and they'd leave that exposed. And then I'd dig, and I'd find another little black spot. And then I'd find another one. And those were the stakes around the fire pit where they would put their cross pieces to cook their meat on over the fire pit. Then you would find little pieces like that. And what those little dark spots were carbon. That was the wood that rotted in the ground. and just stayed there. So when you expose it, it's a perfectly black circle from the wood that was in the ground. Then if there was say a village and the village got burnt, or the village they had to leave and they never went back to it, and the post might have got knocked over, they might have just stayed there. You will find little black marks where the posts of the teepee were if they had a teepee, or the posts of a longhouse or a building if they had a longhouse or a lean-to. So those black marks would be the same thing that you would see in the ground. There would be a round black mark.
My biggest piece of pottery is probably a little bigger than my hand though, but I collect where they plow the field, so there was a whole piece of pottery there, it's not anymore.
Were the designs on the pottery? Could you
Yeah,
say?
there's, yes.
They
Yeah,
decorated it.
lots of designs, yeah.
Most of the stuff we find around here has got like the corn cob, like they ran a corn cob over. It's a real rough finish on the outside of the pottery.
But I got lines, I got all kinds of pieces of pottery, and it's like I said, that's my thing. I like to find the pottery. And I was just saying to him earlier, this year, I was like, you know what I didn't find last year was any pieces of pottery walking the fields. And that day I found, 7 pieces just last week. And I didn't find any arrowheads, but I found 7 pieces of pottery.
Are these a result of digging, or is it like you said, walking the
I
fields?
I walk the field after they plow. I could dig if I want to, but
Yeah.
I prefer to walk.
But the majority of these are just
These are all
walk.
all walks?
All walk. Yep, top of the field find, yeah.
You could dig forever and dig in the wrong spot and be there all day and not find anything.
Yeah.
So usually everybody will take and they'll have a diagram that they follow, and they'll walk, and somebody else will walk, and then they crisscross, and you want to cover as much of that space as you can. So you try to go with other people. And if you're by yourself, I mean, I've done it. I've walked and walked and walked and said, there's nothing here, and then I stop and walk, and then I don't cover the whole area, which I should. I get frustrated because I never find anything. This is the first thing I've ever found locally that I thought was a great find. I mean, I could walk forever. I worked with those guys for 6 to 8 months, and every day we got an hour lunch. And every time they would walk to go to the bathroom, they would walk to the woods to go to the bathroom. They'd come back with an arrowhead that they found walking across the field. I spent an hour every single day for 8 months and didn't find nothing but nuts and bolts and pieces of tractors and equipment.
That's what your eyes trained for.
But that's what they told me. They said, that's what you do is run equipment, so you're finding that. So I said, no, I'm looking for Indian arrowheads. And then I tried to get them to give me one, but they said they couldn't. I couldn't get anything out of them.
Are there burial sites around here that you run across?
I've never seen one myself. No, I've heard of places that they are, but I don't go anywhere near them. They're none of my business, you know.
Well,
Most of them are in the
you know
mountainsides,
they
it seems
exist,
like,
yeah.
that I've been told, so.
A lot of the burial sites that were big and famous were raided back in the late 1700s, early 1800s when they knew they were there. When they chased the Indians out, there was a big burial site down where the creek comes out of Clark Summit and comes down into Lackawanna. That was where their village was, and there was a big burial site there, a huge burial site.
They had a dig going on.
We have records of in certain books in the library of people that raided them, and I think the guy's name was Troop. The town of Troop. He has a book that he wrote, and in that they talk about his collection and other people's collections where they went and they got all the stuff from the burial grounds. Now it's illegal. Back then it wasn't.
They would bury artifacts with the
Yeah,
bodies.
just like I said with a chief, when they buried chief, they put the arrowheads over the top. Well, if people had their own private possessions and they didn't have anybody to, that would leave them to, just like us, they would bury them. Just like the Egyptians did, they buried a lot of their prized possessions with them. So,
we never ran into a burial site.
It's fascinating. It's hard to find a burial site now because it's a couple hundred years gone past. So the weather has changed. Yeah. The leaves have made more topsoil, and now when the leaves are especially in a wooded area, the leaves are on the ground. It's hard to what do you look for? How do you find something if you don't know what's there? You could walk through the woods forever and you could walk over Indian sites for 20 years back and forth every day of your life and never realize it was there because it's buried underneath the ground. Same thing with around rivers. With the flooding, if the flooding sometimes takes it out and exposes it, but sometimes it covers it over. You know, so when it exposes it, it's nice. It's right there laying for
Is
you.
most of that stuff on the table from northeastern Pennsylvania?
It's all from here, all local.
All Wyoming
Somewhat
County.
local, yeah. Wyoming, Lackawanna.
Local Indian.
Yeah, Wyoming County, Luzerne County. It's all kind of close.
Mostly the Seneca and the Susquehannock Indians would be the owners of most of this stuff because it's all local.
Yeah. Some Iroquois, maybe, you know. There might be mixes of Iroquois in there since they did travel down the river with the Wyoming Massacre and all that stuff that went on, you know.
You got the Delaware were here. They came down, and the Lenape were here, of course.
I collect myself. I like a lot of the bigger stuff. He calls them Gesso rocks. That's my last name. So like if I saw something like this in the field, it was probably going in my backpack. And my backpack probably at the end of the day would be like, hey, can you give me a hand carry my backpack out of the field?
And we did that more than once.
Yeah. So, but I collect a lot of the war clubs, you know, and stuff like that. Well, I call them tomahawks, but people think of a tomahawk as being scalped, but that works just as good as scalping, you know.
Yeah, this is a regular axe. This is grooved out.
Wow.
Something that you don't find too often anymore unless you know.
You see the mark where it was tied right to the stick that they used.
Grooved out. A gardening tool. Yeah, I think they got on both.
You want to show what the bicycle seat is? It's
Yeah.
like a tricycle.
What's
I
that?
think this is a
It's like a granny
What's
stand
that?
for me, you know. Some sort of rock and
That was that
roll
little
type of
shaky
method that they use.
Yeah, you can see how.
Bruce, what was that?
I call it a bicycle seat, but that's what it looks like to me. I
Like a
don't know.
rocking horse, like they used it to crush corn or some kind of meal, and they used it like this back and forth to crush maybe fish even, maybe crush fish with that, you know? Put your fish in there and just rock it back and forth until it's mush.
Can we see it? Can you pass that around?
John Deere wasn't here then.
Actually, I did bring two artifacts with me. They're out in Dave's car, and they are two Tomahawk or war clubs that I just found last week. Actually, yeah, they're right here. Actually,
I would think it was broken. It would have been the same thing on this side.
yeah, there's one.
Oh, yeah, when they were flaking
This little rock here, and I should let Dave explain this. You know, let me hear
I found this it's actually a little paint pot. I don't know how they made it, but it's dug out. And I would think it's for mixing their war paint or something like that.
Pay attention.
Excuse me.
There was a guy on eBay. He had the same thing. He found it in the New York City, the state park or the park that's in New York. Central Park.
Yeah.
And he was selling it for $2,500. So I don't. But that's a little paint pot.
That's what they use for putting the war paint on and for decorating their pottery, and they have little paint and they heat it up, and then he actually has one that he showed me in another collection that's a little bit bigger, and it still has the stains of the paint where it rolled out of there and rolled down on the rock.
Oh.
It still has the stain.
That ain't it there with the marble. Is it?
I don't know where you'll find a copy of this,
With the head, the stain on it.
Oh yeah,
That was in the other collection.
Yeah,
but
that was in the last year's.
decades ago when I was teaching in the schools up in Wyalusing, in their library they had a set of books, and I was able to get copies of them. One of those was done by an Edwin Tunis, and shortly after I got those books I heard he had died. But the one of his books is on Indians, and they're pencil drawings he's done, very detailed pencil drawings, and he takes every Indian group that ever lived in, even right out up into Alaska.
See that?
And a lot of the stuff he's showing there, it shows
That's exactly
what they were as they used them and how they're held together and how they were made. Fascinating books. So you'd have to find one in a used bookstore or a flea market or something. But they're marvelous books on how the Indians lived. Takes every Indian group that ever existed in the United States and on right up into Alaska.
Bruce, how did they do mirrors? They didn't give a damn how they looked or what?
No, they actually, let me see if I can remember how they used mirrors. I know they used the water, and then there was something else, and I can't think of how they used to look into something. I'll have to go back and research that
Water.
because,
Still water.
well, they looked at themselves in water, but there was also something else that they used as a mirror, and I don't remember what it was now. It was something that they shined up, and they used it to be able to look in, and it would be a rough, it would not be a very, I don't know if you know or not, but it wasn't a very good mirror, but it was enough that they could see themselves in it, just like an image. That piece that's going around there, the hammer, the axe that's going around there, is right here. It's the same exact piece.
Question with the,
Kind of like
Hang on.
but it's layered. It's real. It's almost like glass. And once they polish it up enough, it does get reflections.
The fishing nets.
Yeah, and that weights. I have a ton of them.
These are net weights for their fishing nets. They would wrap the line around it, and that would be the weight to hold the net down so they could catch the fish in the river. They would get two guys and run the net up the river, and these are fishing net weights. Here's another one. You see the grooves on the sides.
They didn't have much time for TV.
There's a little bit bigger one. You know, it's very, very easy to just for them to just take and notch a little piece out of a stone and then wrap a string around it. And that's basically what they use.
They didn't have any time. They didn't have any time for TV.
location of the artifact, she said northeastern Pennsylvania,
Look, Wyoming Valley.
Wyoming Valley, outside the hard coal mining area, deep mines and strip
Right
mines.
along the
Right
river.
along the
Right
river.
along the river,
Yeah.
but then you're talking about walking through fields,
Yeah.
Yeah, farmers' fields,
Farmers'
cornfields.
fields.
See, the
Private
Indians,
but outside the mining area.
Outside the
Yeah.
mine area,
Yeah,
yes.
but
I don't,
how many artifacts are buried under piles and
well, see, that's the thing in our area here.
Yeah.
We had fields, cornfields, originally planted by the Indians, because the Indians planted corn before we were here.
Yeah.
Before the white man came here, the Indians planted corn, and they taught the
we
white
learned to
man.
plant corn.
They taught us how to plant it.
Yeah.
So there's cornfields that were along the Lackawanna River coming up through the valley. There were cornfields along the Susquehanna River. Some of those fields are the same fields they're using now. Like here in our area, we're unfortunate that the mines came, the coal was here. They strip mined and deep mined everything here. It's going to be very hard for anybody to find anything in this Lackawanna Valley because it's been disturbed. The rivers have been moved.
Yeah.
Those rivers are not in the original places they were when the Indians were here. They moved the rivers to mine the coal where the river was.
a
And
lot
then
of
they moved
people in the
river back.
valley that are doing like little house party and stuff like that around your house, you're gonna find these clay marbles, these Indian marbles. You do find these down here around your houses and stuff like that if you're doing a little gardening outside.
Oh, yeah.
You might get lucky and find an arrowhead or a net weight, you know?
Can we see it? Pass it around.
The marbles.
I'm going to pass this book around and you can look at some of the artifacts that are in here and compare them to what they're passing around.
Now, like I said, I fortunately did grab 2 stones from my truck before I got into Dave's card. I said, I do got these in my truck, I'll bring it with me. Because I know he don't have too many things like this at all. And these here are the tomahawks that I was talking about, or war clubs. These would have been tied onto a stick, you know? And this is what they would have been charging down after you with.
You just come down with a big rock and a stick and whack you up the head.
These two are, this one here has a nice groove in it, and this one here's, don't have the groove, but it shows the wear, you know?
Oh my goodness.
See, we're used to seeing the cowboy and Indian movies where they have a tomahawk with an iron blade and it looks like a hatchet like we use to cut trees down. But they used rocks. I mean, the early Indians didn't have the iron and the way to perfect iron and to make it sharpen like a point. So, you know, they would use rocks. Rocks were that was their workflow.
They would stick it in the fire all day long.
And this picture here I took from New Mexico. This picture was taken down in New Mexico of an Indian writing on a wall of a rock. So I'll pass that around. Even around here, we're liable to find some of this stuff in some of the caves. We'll pass that around.
You see how when it was like fire treated, it might have been near a fire at one time or something? I say hopefully it's not the blood in there, so it didn't say, you know? And my house isn't haunted from having any of these artifacts. I haven't had nothing weird go on at my house or anything like that. You know, I get that question all the time. You have any weird things happen?
It's a great Hollywood,
Right.
you know?
A grandfather.
A grandfather.
Yeah, because they're the oldest things in the world, and only a grandfather has that kind of wisdom.
Now, I brought these once before when I did a presentation on the Indians, and Dave has the same book that these came out of. He actually owns the book. I just have copies from the book. But these are all the paths that the Indians used, the major traveling paths of all the tribes. And there's a map, and it shows you where the path went, where it originated from, where it went to. The Lackawanna path is the one that's closest to us. The Lackawaxen path is right up over the hill. There's one that goes through the Great Swamp and the Great Buffalo Swamp. And then there's one that goes up into New York State. And basically these paths are now some of the roads that we use.
Yeah.
But they're not the highways, because the highways were built later. The paths that the Indians used turned into wagon trail paths and footpaths, and then they turned into horse and buggy trails where they take their wagons, Conestoga wagons and stuff, and move it west. And then eventually those paths became roads because the Indians traveled the easiest place for them to travel along the rivers, you know, where they didn't have to, and they did have to cross mountains. So when they did, they would try to go through a valley like where Route 107 goes up through the Notch. That would have been an Indian path through there. But the Indians like to travel the tops of the mountains as much as possible. So the places where there are no roads, you'll still find Indian paths because they would like to be able to see the smoke from villages and smoke from other Indian tribes, so they would know when they were coming up against a tribe that was not so friendly with them, or where they would see white men, so they would know not to go there. So the Indians would travel the tops of the mountains as much as possible. But when they knew they were in friendly territory and it was their own people, they would travel along the rivers. So those are the major roads that are along the rivers. Like the road that goes up to Tunkhannock, that was the main path that they used. That was General Sullivan traveled that same path while he was chasing them. So, you know, that's where the roads came from that they used. But I have the paths here too if you want to look at the paths.
Was there any artifacts around the pothole?
That's out of my area. I'm sorry, I don't know.
They found the pothole from underneath. They actually discovered that mining up from underneath.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, they weren't looking for. They were looking for coal.
Honestly, I've never really searched too much of this side of the river. Scranton, Lackawanna, Jessup, Artful. I'm more myself, Wyoming County, up Tunkhannock, up at his neck of the woods up there where he did that big dig. More closer to that area. And Towanda on up the line. Plains area down that way, Wilkes-Barre. Very little I do, but I do walk some of those fields. I do have permission to walk some of the fields that are remaining in the Wyoming Valley. There are very, very, very few fields left. And if you are lucky enough and fortunate enough like me to get in there, usually if there's a guy already in there, rule is the property owner ain't gonna let nobody else on the property, so and like I said, I've been doing it 27 years, so I know most of the farmers in the valley for 27 years, you know?
When you pick up a rock like that, how do you know it's kind of an antique type thing, you know, from the Indians? Some of the, you know, that one I'm looking at it from here, it's just, I've got a few of those out in my backyard.
I hear you. No,
Well, it's from
I mean,
what,
there's no, sure.
a lot of it's from knowing the area, knowing that there's other Indian artifacts at that point. I mean, you could walk over and grab this rock down in the Lackawanna River and say, look, I found an Indian rock, it looks like this. But chance 99% of the time, it's just a rock. But when you go out into where there was an Indian village, and a lot of the artifacts are still there, like this came from the Tunkhannock Bridge area. And I showed this to the archaeologists, and of course they showed me the marks on the bottom, and they showed me how it perfectly fit their hand and how they used it to rub. Same thing with a little thing like this.
You don't want to know what they use this for. No, I'm not.
When you look at something like this, you know, that would to you would just look like a flat rock, but you could see the grooves on it where they would use it to scrape the hides.
If you say so.
Well, you have to. I mean, if it's not anywhere near where there was an Indian village or there are Indian artifacts.
Too, weren't there?
What's that?
There were Indians here in Germany.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But we just said that most of this has been mined and turned over, and a lot of it's disappeared because it's been dug up by machines, and you know we don't have that luxury of being along the river where there was just a field and it's still a field.
Yeah, the sites that I go to myself are virgin grounds. There's been no human activity other than the plow and the farm going down there. Nobody's been down there to dig. Nobody put up houses. But all the sites that I go to myself are villages. They were once big villages at these areas that I go to. So most of the time when I get out of my truck and I pick up a rock, it's mostly an Indian artifact.
I'll take your word for it.
No, I won't.
No, don't.
I like my hair what
That's why we women can do it.
They were ruthless, just as ruthless.
I'm going to just show you the difference as I walk around so you can see the different types and styles of arrowheads. That would be a spear point, and then, you know, for small game, you would have a smaller one. And these are different types of Indians too. Made different types of points. There's different names for different points. That would be it could be a small spear or it could be an arrow. That could be either one. But this one would be shot on an arrow because it would be heavier thrown on a stick. You can see the different sizes. You know, how you go from that small to something skinny with a sharp point for penetration, and this would be tied to a spear for throwing. They would chip it. Yeah, they would take another stone, another different type of stone that wouldn't chip, like a heavier stone, and they would use that to chip the edges and shape them. They're actually in that book. You'll see a picture of a man sitting. He's reproducing what the Indians used to do. He's showing them how they used to chip them and make them arrowheads. Well, they would use a rock with their hammer.
I have a bunch of chips. I have 5 gallon buckets of chips.
Well, they could, but then this would be bouncing around because it's so light. It would be hard to do it. What they usually do is they would take another rock and they would chip it with a rock. Yeah. Because this stuff is brittle. would break. They gotta get that groove in there so they can tie their string around it. Actually, it wouldn't be string, it would be some kind of an animal, like a bent muscle or a sinew, some part of a muscle, and they would wrap it with that. I don't know. I can't say for sure if they did. You can see the different sizes. That's a spear point to an arrowhead to another type of arrowhead. I didn't. These are his. I have some of my own. See the different sizes. Like, everybody sees these and they say, you know, that's an arrowhead. Type of rock. I mean, there's a rock that chips easily, but still can hold an edge and be sharp. And that would be tied onto a thin stick. And then I mean, they weren't stupid. They were smart people. They didn't have what we have, you know. We didn't have the modern technology and machinery and everything else. They knew what they had needed to do to survive. You can see the difference in a spear point to an arrowhead. You know, like that could be a spear point as well for a smaller spear. But I mean, to kill a bigger animal, you needed a bigger spear point. And that would be tied.
The same shape, don't they? They're the same shape.
Yeah, see, that would be tied. That's where they would take the muscle from an animal and they would wrap that around the stick. Same thing here. This would get wrapped around those little grooves. And that would get wrapped to a small stick like my finger. And that would be like an arrow, just like that.
What did they use to make that dish that you found?
They would take another rock that's a harder rock, and then they would set that rock down, and they would just take a big rock and almost like a hammer and chisel. They would take a rock that had more of a point to it, and then they would hit it with another rock, and they would chip it, and then they would take and they would crack. Well, they'd have to be careful. I mean, I've chipped rock myself building walls, and you take a hammer and you can break a rock. Like I can split a rock perfectly in half. I can take and cut a line with something sharp like this, cut a line in the rock, flip the rock over, and then give it one wrap, and it'll break right perfectly in half, right where I hit that, where I did that line. I mean, I can do that with a hammer, so they could do it with a rock. You know, if they wanted to square off a rock, all they have to do is take something sharp like this, hit it in a straight line, and put a little indentation in it, then flip it over. When you flip it over and you whack that rock, it'll break perfectly in that groove. The different sizes of points. Spear point, arrowhead point, made out of the same type of material. And this is how they would tie it onto their spear, onto their stick. And this is how they would tie it onto the small western arrow. Chipmunk. They're all small. They would take another. Walter, you got anything else, Walter? Tom or Dave, do you have anything else you'd like to explain to anybody, or anything that you didn't show them?
They can come up and look.
Anybody have questions? Any other questions before we?
Feel free to hang around and look at the stuff. And thank you so much, fellas, for doing this
Maybe they can come back when they
Thank you. What's that? Thanks for everybody that came to
Yeah, it's possible.
visit us tonight.
Were you guys, I'd be glad to bring my stuff in sometime. I mean, I have
Were your ancestors, were they Indians or?
No, my ancestors came over on the boat in '32, so, and well, 22 actually, so.
One of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to put this box here. If anybody would like to put a donation in there. These guys had to travel from Tunkhannock to come over here, and at least if we could give them their gas money, I'd be thrilled.
I try to stay incognito. I don't either. That's why I kept it.